Welcome to the Rising Latterly podcast.
Each episode, you will learn something fascinating so you can bring big ideas to your small talk.
Your growth is our growth. Listening to these episodes, subscribing to our weekly newsletter, engaging our posts on social media, and sharing our show with your friends and family is deeply appreciated as we work hard to expand this platform. You can also visit our page at buymeacoffee.com to contribute what you think the show is worth.
To the folks who are taking this step, we can't thank you enough. Look for the link in our show notes for more details about how you can support and follow us.
And now, please enjoy this episode. Well, I'm going to talk about a lesson that I learned from running a marathon recently, and it's probably something you may not expect. But this was brought to my attention from a person I recently met named Tim. Tim opened my mind to someone named Rosie Ruiz. So shout out to Tim for being a node. But have you ever heard of Rosie Ruiz?
I have not, no. Tell me more.
Yeah. All right. So Rosie Ruiz, she actually passed away in 2019, but she's infamously known for jumping into the 1980 Boston Marathon with about a mile to go and sprinting towards the finish line as if she had been running the full 26.2.
That's a fun thing to be known for.
Right? So here she is, right? She crosses the finish line. She sets a record at that time for marathons, 2 hours, 31 minutes, 56 seconds, just crushing it, right? It's like one of the wildest sports stories of all time. Here we have an unknown runner setting a record. And I'm sure you can already tell where this is going, but the real runners in the race and the actual winners they were immediately suspicious. So Jacqueline Garreau and Bill Rogers were the actual winners, but Rosie couldn't answer questions about the race course, about landmarks, and apparently had zero idea what an interval was when she was asked about her training routine. Right? She also barely broke a sweat. She had this huge thick layer on, her clothing was too thick. She clearly looked like she didn't belong.
Yeah.
Anyway, after 8 days of investigating and looking through pictures from the race, officials noticed that she was in any of them, right? She wasn't around. So they stripped her medal. They eventually gave it to Jacqueline Garreau, the real winner. It also turned out that Ruiz, who, by the way, claimed her entire life that she ran this race. Apparently, she also course cut in the New York City Marathon in 1979 to qualify for the 1980 Boston Marathon. Apparently, she was seen on the subway around Central Park. So very suspicious. Turns out she also had a pretty checkered professional past. She was accused of stealing money from an employer. She was also caught selling drugs to an undercover cop in Florida. I mean, this is the type of person she was, and she actually ended up serving time for both of these cases. People can look her up if they want more details. The real reason I'm sharing this story, though, is to talk about and to think about the various layers and levels to this. I mean, if you start to connect the dots, it gets pretty interesting. So, look, we're here. We don't know her psychological history. We don't know her demons, her motivational drivers, all the stuff that she was dealing with that led to these actions. But clearly, it's safe to say that we can all agree that you should have more integrity than to cheat a marathon. Looking back, we joked, we laughed when it first came up, but it might be funny now. And the fact that she got away with it, it's one of the ultimate troll jobs, but it's actually the opposite of funny, right? More importantly, I think it's an example of unawareness of how your actions, your ego, your energy, your entire vibe, everything you do, everything you think has ripple effects on others, right? So she decides to do this. She completely overshadows the fact that Jacqueline Garreau still set a course record that day, 2 hours, 34 minutes, 28 seconds, which also beat her own personal goal she had set out for this race. She wanted to run it in under 2 hours and 35 minutes, and she did that. It also overshadowed the fact that Garreau beat the pre-race favorite. And another interesting angle is that Ruiz never returned her medal. So Jacqueline was given a substitute medal. She also overshadowed the fact that Bill Rogers won his 4th straight Boston Marathon on the men's side. So there's all that. And then you can start to connect the dots in my mind to grief and loss. Grief is an emotion which has been top of mind for me. It's something I've been observing deeply, considering the conversation we had last week with Paul Denniston. Um, and, obviously in that conversation, we talked about grief. We talked about how it manifests itself. We talked about how it plays itself out in society. We talked about how silent it is. We talked about how prevalent it is. And ultimately, we talked about how we can all better understand how to cope with this emotion individually and collectively. I'll tell you that preparing for that episode, having the conversation, and then reflecting on it throughout this week felt like one of the most profound shifts in perspective I ever experienced, at least year to date. I mean, first of all, there were so many examples of people this week who must have been experiencing grief, whether it was the wide receiver Henry Ruggs and the accident that he was involved in, where the lawyer for the victim's family legitimately came out and said that the grief is beyond comprehension. It could be also the Business Insider article that recently came out where they highlighted 4 accidental killers and the grief that they have to live with. It could be news from the festival this weekend where at the Travis Scott concert, like 8 people died. So I'm saying, like, grief is everywhere. People are dealing with it. It's like one of those emotions where it suddenly is a part of your life and all of a sudden you have to cope with it. Right. And so it's just like, for some reason this week, like I literally felt the shift in perspective. Like there was a magnitude that felt unique. I knew like new neurons are being formed. My brain is definitely creating new algorithms in terms of just like how to be more kind and compassionate to the person I'm talking to, because there's a really high chance that something that causes grief is happening to the person that I'm talking to, or it has happened. And so it's like, all this stuff, and then that they're going to be silent about it. So I was thinking about all that, connecting the dots. But going back to Rosie Ruiz in the 1980 Boston Marathon, grief's everywhere, right? I'm sure the real winners and other runners who trained and cramped and grunted their way through the race, they all felt a little grief and a little sense of loss after hearing about the cheating. Who knows how that affected people individually for the rest of their lives, if at all? But there's a chance that people became different people, and that had a ripple effect on the people those people surrounded themselves with. You know what I'm saying? It's like when you're in a bad mood and then you take it out on someone, and then that puts them in a bad mood, and then they transfer that to the next person that they chat with, it becomes a domino effect. And imagine if that just rippled for an entire lifetime. Specifically, right, the winners, they lose out on the actual moment of victory that would have lasted with them forever, like running through the tape. Imagine running towards the finish line and noticing the tape has already been broken through. And now every time you think about that 1980 race in Boston, there's a high chance that the name Rosie Ruiz is mentioned, or somehow it crosses the psyche and it becomes a reminder again. And it's just a ripple effect on and on and on. And again, here I am telling this story, just keeping that memory fresh.
Right. Yeah.
But everyone involved, right? Rosie Ruiz, Jacqueline Garreau, Bill Rogers, they all experienced some grief or loss. And as with anything, of course, life continued for all of them, but the silent repercussions of someone else's actions is really the point I'm trying to drive home. I think about mining my own subconscious. I think about mining the subconscious of people in general. I think if you mine your own, you can think about the broader spectrum. And when you think about how this is experienced at scale, millions of people are experiencing something similar to this. Someone else is capturing glory without putting the effort in. And even if it's corrected, it's still a relatively stained moment to experience. And that's lasting. So the bottom line, think about your actions, think about your subconscious drivers, reflect on the ripple effect, avoid being a Rosie Ruiz, and become aware of the Rosie Ruiz situations going on all around you, so you can increase your compassion, your kindness, your empathy, and just understand what other people may be experiencing at the same time you're experiencing whatever you're experiencing.
Yeah, I think with the Rosie Ruiz case, what comes to mind for me with grief is just the idea that Paul brought up. And then he talked about it in his book. Grief isn't always about losing a person. It's losing an opportunity or losing what could have been. And I guess that's exactly what it is when you lose a person too, especially when you lose them unexpectedly or prematurely. You lose all these years that you thought would happen, all these moments that you envisioned, and they're not there anymore. And for, Jacqueline, is it Garrow?
Goro, yeah.
Garreau, yeah, or Bill Rogers, I'm sure they had a vision of what it would look like at the finish line, and it was spoiled by Rosie Ruiz. And that's a pretty extreme example. Those are people at the sort of peak of their game, but that happens in little ways for all of us throughout our lives. The case that comes to mind for me, watch this documentary on Netflix called Shirkers. Have you ever heard of that?
Nope.
Yeah, it was really powerful. It was put together by this Singapore born filmmaker, Sandy Tan. When she was in her teen years, actually made a movie with a bunch of her friends. She wrote the script. She was the lead actor. She made a movie with her friends, and it was directed by their film teacher and mentor. I think his name was George Cardano. He was kind of an enigmatic figure. He was much older than them, maybe 20 years older than them. He kind of ingratiated himself in their group of friends, and he appointed himself director in this whole project. And, you can imagine when you're 18 or 19 making a film, especially a film of the quality that they made, that's a pretty impressive thing. At the end of the whole summer of shooting, he ran off with all of the footage and all of the audio. And so that is just the way you describe Rosie Ruiz, and the moment that the moments of joy that she stole from competitors in the race. That's exactly what happened to Sandy Tan and her friends. Like this moment of being able to edit the movie, being able to see the finished product, being able to release it, all of that was stolen from them. And I don't want to give away how that story ends, because I really would encourage people to watch that documentary. But that to me is like a perfect example of grief, not necessarily being about a person, but being about effort that you put into something not being realized because it was either spoiled by someone else or spoiled by chance in some cases. But that's as real a grief as I think, it is when you lose a person, because your future feels like it's taken away from you.
Mm-hmm. It's like, I wish there was more answers, like what drove Rosie Ruiz. Maybe it was her childhood. I mean, maybe she just had a rough upbringing. And again, it just goes back to just the connections of your childhood and how that plays out throughout your entire life. And again, just an awareness of what you do not only matters, but it could really affect another person, and you don't even know that person exists.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think you don't never know exactly how your actions will affect other people. I guess, especially with a situation like Rosie Ruiz, where she was probably just thinking like, I want to win the race, right? Like she's like, I've never gotten much attention in my life. Like this is going to be huge. Like I'm not stealing anything from anyone. I'm not hurting anyone. Like this is I'm going to make a spectacle of myself. I'm going to be the winner of the Boston Marathon. Like this is going to be an awesome thing. And when you become too, focused on your own life, you lose sight of how putting the spotlight on yourself may take it from people who worked really hard for it. At least that seems to be the case with this story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all I had on Rosie Ruiz, bro.
Got it.
Yeah. I was just trying to keep it pretty short.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, I feel you, dude. Well, I guess on the flip side of that coin, I was in Mexico this past weekend as part of a service trip. We were building a house for a family as part of this missionary group called Homes of Hope. They built a couple thousand or thousands of houses at this point for families living in poverty all over the world. So we went down there was alongside a couple dozen volunteers and a few lead builders from the missionary group. And we put a house up in 2 days for a family of 5 down in Mexico, mother, father, 2 daughters, and a son. And prior to them being selected by Homes of Hope for a new house, they were living in basically a shanty. It was, dirt floors. It was pretty much packed to the gills with all their possessions. It wasn't much bigger than the cab of a truck. You can just
Wow.
imagine living in that space. I mean, by anyone's standards in the first world, it was totally unlivable, but it was a great trip. I mean, it's the second time I've been down to Mexico, and there's a lot of some events in your life. I think you're able to process quickly. You're able to kind of fit them into your life story. But, the last 2 times I've gone down to Mexico, it's hard for me to, I guess, put kind of context around them because it's so extremely different down there than what life is up here. You feel like you're stepping into a kind of different planet, and the challenges that people face down there are so different than the challenges that we face up here. The standard of living is so different. Even like, even looking at they have a huge stray dog population, and when people think of pets up here, they're very well taken care of, they're very well fed, and like most of the dogs that you see down there have no owners. They live outside and they're malnourished and unhealthy. And I think like it's just hard seeing people and even these dogs, even these animals struggle to survive in such different conditions than what we have here, and come back and not feel a sort of sense of discord in your own personal narrative, because you're like, there was a dog down there. I don't mean to focus on the dogs because it was really, we went down there for the people, but there's a dog down there that half of his ear was torn. Again, stray dog. He was walking with a limp. He's covered in these sores, and he comes up to me with a bottle of water in his mouth, and I'm thinking that a full bottle of water from the work site that we were working on, and I'm thinking he wants me to like pour out the bottle of water into a bowl so he can drink it. So I take it from his mouth and I pour it into this little metal bucket that we had, and he doesn't go for it. And I'm like, what do you want, buddy? And I throw the plastic bottle on the ground, and he picks it up and then hoists it in my direction like he wants to play fetch. So it's like, and
Wow.
he's walking on 3 legs, and it's like, I can't like in good conscience play fetch with you. You're clearly afflicted by something, and then you go back home, and my parents have a dog who loves fetch just like this dog did, and the difference between that dog and my parents' dog is my parents' dog Buck is well fed and has a backyard and doesn't have any sores on his body, and if he gets sick he gets taken to the vet, and it's just there's nothing that Buck did to be more deserving of that lifestyle than this dog down here in Mexico. And you just realize how much the life you're born into and that sort of that lottery of birth affects your years on this planet. And I mean, I just got back this afternoon, and it's hard to kind of compartmentalize that experience into the context of my life, because you just feel like you've been catapulted into a different planet with all the same people, all the same kind of features of life. It's just a family that loves each other. This is a family that wants shelter, that wants to advance their future just like we do here. And they are fighting a very different battle than we are.
Well, what were they
And
saying to you as you were building the homes? I mean, were they talking? Were they involved?
they were very involved. Yeah, they were very involved. I mean, the kids were unbelievable. Like the kids wanted to help out. I mean, they were like adamant about helping out. The youngest of their children, Angel, I bet he was maybe like 6 or 7. He kept stealing the paintbrush from me because he wanted to like paint the house himself. It was like hardly strong enough to hold the paint roller, but he tried to take the paint roller back from me. He's like, no, this is my job. So I think there's a tremendous amount of joy in this weekend for them, because in this case, I mean, they've been waiting for House from Home's Hope for 3 years. They,
Oh,
they had
wow.
applied 3 years ago, and they had at that point sold their car. So they had to walk miles just to get to a grocery store, and whatever food they brought back, it's not like they had a refrigerator to put that in. Like even that kind of thing, like, we can bring perishables back home and keep them in a refrigerator for multiple days at a time. Like that's not a privilege they have. Like they're kind of just trying to get from one day to the next. And so anyway, so yeah, I mean, the spirit, like they're incredibly involved. Like they were, so happy that we were there and that they were given this gift of a home. I think the thing that you see down there is like the joy that comes from being deprived of something for so long. Like if you are living in a house and you move to a bigger house, there's maybe, a little bit of joy associated with that. Like whatever that marginal amount of joy is, it comes to you and you get that upgrade. But for them, it's like when you see someone experience a life-changing upgrade where it's like, might be the difference between my kids not getting a disease. This might be the difference between my kids being able to stay in school 10 years longer than they would have were we to have just lived in that shanty for the rest of their childhood. Like that is a very complex emotion because there's so much, I don't know. It's hard. I can't describe it. I mean, when we finished the house and they handed the keys over to them, you're like looking at these people with tears in their eyes, and you can just feel the intensity of that emotion for them, of like the whole trajectory of our family has shifted in this one weekend. Like who knows what the future holds for any of those kids. I think it's a certainly brighter future than it would have been, but it's like maybe the future will be a little bit brighter for these kids, and then that means the future will be a little brighter for their kids. And you start to look at this whole timeline, and it's like, wow, like maybe this was a seed that could be bearing fruit 100 years from now, even after that house is gone. So it puts you at this inflection point in this family's lives that's just really powerful.
Talk about ripple effect.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And
exactly.
It sounds like the difference. I mean, it's like going from 0 to 1. That's where the real value is created, as opposed to going from 99 to 100.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we've heard that statistic around after $80,000 a year, $100,000 a year, like money doesn't bring people any more happiness with every new dollar they bring in the door. I don't know how true that is. I can't speak to those studies, but to your point, it's undeniable when people go from 0 to 1. Like this is not about luxury. This is not about creature comforts. This is about people having a platform to develop their lives in. And I guess that's part of what is so striking down there too. We here in the US, like we may have our problems, but people have platforms to develop themselves and to like further their lives. We have like education, we have like infrastructure, we have roads that people can actually drive on, like we have hospitals, and down there it is like very undeveloped.
Yeah, but you know what? They sound a lot more resilient than a lot of people here.
That's very true. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, if you put a person like that here, I could only imagine what they would do. Absolutely. Yeah, that's what's so heartbreaking about it. These people have all these, this tremendous spirit and tremendous resilience, and not complaining about anything. It's not complaining about anything relative to the petty stuff that we complain about here. And I guess that's maybe what happens when you're faced with that level of hardship. Like it forges character. It really, you can just see it in these people's faces. They faced so much and they never gave up. And that's what's so humbling about it. And that's why it's a uncomfortable thing coming back, because you're faced to look in the mirror at the end of it and you're like, who am I compared to them? So
yeah. And then, like that's why being able to build it in 2 days is, first of all, amazing. But also you're like, even if this hurts, or even if I'm working 15 hours today, I mean, it's nothing relative to what these people have gone through. And so, yeah, your 2 days of effort for somebody to be able to like literally go from 0 to 1, it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I'll share one more little anecdote from this is actually they play a video before the weekend kicks off, and the founder of Homes for Hope speaks and talks about a little allegory that inspired him when he first began this project of building houses for families around the world that were in poverty and very in need and deserving of a house. He talks about this allegory of the storm that washes thousands of starfish up on the beach, and a boy goes down to the beach and starts throwing in the starfish back into the water one by one. And an older man comes along and looks down at the boy confused and says, what are you doing? You're never going to be able to get all these thousands of starfish back into the water. And the boy picks up one starfish and throws it back into the water and says, but I made a difference to that one. And I think that's certainly the driving philosophy behind Homes for Hope. But I think that's a philosophy that we can all take with us that can maybe help us combat a little bit of the cynicism that we may feel around like the state of the world and where things are. And, I think a lot of us, we're so used to seeing these headlines of tragedy and all over the world and all these things that we feel like we can't, all these problems that we feel like we can't make a dent in. And I think we feel maybe at times helpless looking at problems as big as climate change or, world hunger. But I feel like that's a pretty powerful allegory to keep in mind. Like you can't, you can't maybe change the entire world, but you can change someone's entire world for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's why this podcast exists. And that's why this podcast doesn't have to have like a niche, right? Our strength is in our diversity. You scroll through the body of work here, there's going to be something for somebody. And as you said, it's like you can change someone's life through what you put out there or what you do. And it's important to think about that because, again, it goes back to the ripple effect. What you do, what you say, how you act, all your vibes, like that really does have an impact more than you think. Probably has more impact on another person than it actually does to you. Like even if you did satisfy your ego somehow, some way, I bet it had a larger impact on someone else because let's say you did accomplish your goal and you like stroked your ego for whatever reason. And it turned out to influence somebody. And like they now, like, for example, went and ran a race, or they now go and volunteer for Homes for Hope or Homes of Hope. Like, you don't know the influence you have on other people, but it's larger than you think it is.
Absolutely, dude. No, it's an excellent point. I feel like the image that just came to mind for me, the way you said that, it's like when you do something only for yourself, it's like this little feedback loop, like this little self-contained feedback loop. And maybe it brings you like a little bit of joy or I don't know, satisfaction, but it kind of starts and ends with you. But when you do something for other people, it's like letting something out into the world. And like, you never know where it's going to go. It's going to matter for the people that you help, but it's going to matter for the people that they help. It's like, instead of holding on to your gift and just wanting to give what you have back to yourself, it's like, imagine if you just like let it all go, how far those ripples could travel.
Well, that's one angle, but I'm also saying like in that ego loop, right? Like, let's say like, all right, so I ran a marathon, did it for myself. This is something that I wanted to challenge myself, do something in silence. Like nobody even really knew I was doing it until like the week before. And that's for myself, right? So I'm checking my own ego box in a way, but little do I know that might have influenced somebody to start training for a marathon. And so even if you are in your own ego loop, I'm saying be cognizant of that because that still has a ripple effect on other people.
Yeah. Well, and it's certainly running a marathon is a very positive thing. You're not.
That's true.
Yeah. But I'm saying I agree with you completely. Like whatever you're doing to satisfy your ego, or to fulfill that, which we all have. We all have that instinct. It's like try to direct it in a positive direction, because Rosie Ruiz had an ego instinct, and that ended up being a taker from other people instead of a giver.
So the lesson from today that I'm gathering is do stuff for other people, avoid being a Rosie Ruiz, be cognizant of the Rosie Ruiz situations around you, and really reflect on the ripple effect.
Yeah, I like that. And go out there and watch Shirkers too. I know I had brought that up, but it made me really think a lot about grief, because you had brought that up too. I've been thinking about that a lot after our conversation with Paul last week. Like, grief can take many forms, and like, honor the fact that even if you haven't maybe lost someone, there may be real pain in losing out on an opportunity. And that's what I feel like that was reaffirmed by this experience down in Mexico. It's like, dude, like, this family had each other. They were all alive. Like, from the way it was presented to me, it's not like there were any significant deaths in the family, but what was so impactful for them was that all this time that they had lost being unable to cultivate a life in the living conditions they were in, it was kind of redeemed by the fact that they now had a house to move forward in. So grief comes in many forms. It's not just about people. It's about time. It's about opportunity. And whenever you're faced with an opportunity to maybe steer someone in another direction and create opportunities for them, do it, because it feels awesome. If you enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the Rising Weekly newsletter sent out each week.
Every Friday, we expand on the episode with insights, recommendations, and more.
You can sign up at risinglatterly.com.
Thank you.